My name is Sarah. I am 26 years old, and I am standing in the middle of a grand crystal chandelier-lit ballroom, watching the man who gave me half my DNA lie to a room of 200 people. The air in the country club was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and roasted prime rib, but all I could focus on was the microphone in my father's hand. He raised his champagne glass, looking lovingly into the eyes of his beautiful, much younger bride, and told the crowd how blessed he was to finally start a family, claiming he had never known true love or the responsibility of a child before this very moment. A collective, adoring sigh rippled through the wealthy guests, but the sound made my stomach churn with a violent, acidic nausea. I looked down at the aged, slightly creased piece of official government paper clutched in my trembling fingers, feeling the weight of 26 years of abandonment pressing down on my chest. He was erasing me, wiping my entire existence from his life story just to play the role of the perfect, untainted groom for his new wealthy in-laws. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs, a chaotic drumbeat of anger and profound grief, as I took a deep breath, stepped out from the shadows of the floral arrangements, and began walking directly toward the head table. I was about to give his new bride a wedding gift she would never forget, and as his eyes finally locked onto mine, the smug smile completely vanished from his face, replaced by a pale, terrified realization of what was about to happen. To truly understand how I ended up crashing a ridiculously expensive wedding on a sunny Saturday afternoon, I have to take you back to the very beginning of the end of my childhood. My father, Robert, who is now 52 years old, packed his bags and walked out the front door of our modest suburban home when I was exactly 10 years old. I remember that day with a terrifying, crystal-clear precision that still haunts me. It was raining heavily, the kind of torrential downpour that makes the sky look like a bruised plum and rattles the window panes. I was sitting on the living room carpet, playing with a jigsaw puzzle, when I heard the heavy, definitive thud of his leather suitcase hitting the hardwood floor in the hallway. He did not kneel down to hug me. He did not explain that sometimes adults make mistakes, or promise that he would always love me no matter what happened between him and my mother. He simply put on his dark trench coat, looked over my head as if I were just another piece of furniture in the room, and walked out into the storm. The sound of the front door clicking shut echoed through the house, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence that would define my family for years to come. My mother, Linda, a fiercely resilient woman who is now 50 years old, was left to pick up the shattered pieces of our lives completely by herself. She worked 2 grueling jobs just to keep the electricity on and put cheap, generic brand food on our kitchen table. I watched her beautiful, youthful face age prematurely, deep lines of exhaustion etching themselves around her eyes and mouth as the stress of being a single parent consumed her. She never spoke poorly of him, maintaining a dignified silence that I now realize took a superhuman amount of emotional strength. But I saw the quiet tears she shed late at night while sitting at the kitchen island, frantically calculating bills on a worn-out notepad. While she was breaking her back to provide for me, my father became nothing more than a ghost, a phantom who only materialized in the form of a legally mandated bare minimum child support check that arrived late more often than it arrived on time. He moved to a different city, changed his phone number multiple times, and slowly faded into the background of my life, leaving behind a dark shadow of rejection that I carried everywhere I went. Growing up without him was a constant, dull ache that flared up into agonizing pain during every father-daughter dance, every middle school graduation, and every single holiday. I spent my teenage years desperately trying to figure out what was wrong with me. What had I done to make him walk away so easily? Was I not smart enough? Was I not pretty enough? Was I just not worth the effort of loving? These toxic, self-destructive questions played on a continuous loop in my mind, eroding my self-esteem and making me incredibly defensive and guarded. I felt thick emotional walls to protect myself from ever feeling that kind of crushing disappointment again. Every time the phone rang on my birthday, a tiny, pathetic part of my heart would hope it was him, calling to apologize, calling to say he wanted to be my dad again. But it was never him. The silence from his end of the world was deafening, a loud, clear message that he had completely moved on and I was not invited to be a part of his new reality. I learned to swallow my tears and pretend I did not care, but the wound was always there, festering just beneath the surface. It was not until I went away to college that I finally started to heal, thanks in large part to meeting my best friend, Jessica. Jessica is also 26 years old, a vibrant, fiercely loyal woman with a bright laugh that can cut through the darkest of moods. We met in our freshman dorm, and she quickly became the sister I never had. I poured my heart out to her one night over cheap takeout, crying until my eyes were swollen as I recounted the deep, painful wounds my father had left behind. Jessica listened without judgment, holding my hand and validating my pain in a way no one ever had before. She helped me realize that his absence was a reflection of his own severe flaws, his own profound cowardice, and had absolutely nothing to do with my worth as a human being. With her constant, unwavering support, I started going to therapy on campus. I worked hard through my abandonment issues, slowly dismantling the walls I had built, and I finally reached a place where I genuinely thought I had made peace with the fact that Robert was just a sperm donor, a man who shared my blood, but absolutely nothing else. I truly believed I had moved on, that the chapter of my life concerning my father was permanently closed and gathering dust on a forgotten shelf. I had a good job as a graphic designer, a tiny but comfortable apartment, and a chosen family that loved me unconditionally. But the universe has a very cruel, twisted sense of humor. It was a completely ordinary Tuesday evening, about 3 months ago. I was in my living room, wearing old sweatpants and folding a pile of warm laundry, when Jessica burst through my front door, looking like she had just seen a ghost. Her eyes were wide, her face was flushed, and she was clutching her laptop tightly against her chest. She did not even say hello. She just marched straight over to the coffee table, slammed the laptop down, flipped the screen open, and pointed a trembling finger at the display. "Sarah, you need to sit down and look at this right now," she demanded, her voice shaking with a potent mixture of shock and intense protective anger. I dropped the towel I was holding and cautiously approached the screen, my heart doing a weird, unpleasant flutter in my chest. Staring back at me was a beautifully designed, high-end wedding website. The banner at the top featured a professional, sun-drenched engagement photo of my father, looking older but remarkably distinguished in a tailored suit, wrapping his arms around a stunning blonde woman who looked to be in her mid-30s. The bold, elegant cursive fonts across the photo read, "Emily and Robert's Journey to Forever." I felt the blood completely drained from my face, pooling somewhere around my ankles. My father was getting married to a woman named Emily, who was 35 years old. He had not called to tell me. He had not sent an invitation. He had not even sent a brief text message. But the sheer shock of discovering his wedding online was absolutely nothing compared to the violent gut punch waiting for me in the About the Groom section of the website. Jessica gently placed her hand on my shoulder as I scrolled down the page, my eyes scanning the heavily romanticized text. The paragraph described Robert as a dedicated, hard-working businessman who had spent his entire adult life relentlessly focused on building his career and securing his financial future. And then, there it was, the sentence that made the entire room spin violently out of control. After years of waiting for the right moment and the perfect partner, Robert is overjoyed to finally settle down and start his very first family with Emily. He is so excited to experience the joys of fatherhood and build a loving home from the ground up. I read the words over and over again, my brain violently rejecting the information. His very first family. The joys of fatherhood. It was as if a massive, invisible hand had reached into my chest and crushed my lungs. I could not breathe. I could not speak. The sheer audacity, the cruel, calculated erasure of my mother and me was so profound that it shattered the delicate peace I had spent years desperately trying to build. He wasn't just moving on. He was rewriting history to make himself the hero of a story that never happened. The tears did not come immediately. Instead, a hot, searing wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over my entire body. I pushed the laptop away, my hands shaking so violently I had to clench them into tight fists. "He erased me," I whispered, the words tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. He literally wrote me out of existence so he could play the role of the pure, unburdened bachelor for this new woman. Jessica pulled me into a tight hug, her own voice cracking with emotion. I am so sorry, Sarah. I saw it on a mutual acquaintance's social media feed, and I followed the links. I debated not showing you, but I knew you had a right to know what a manipulative liar he is. Over the next few weeks, the anger did not subside. It metamorphosed into a cold, hard, and terrifyingly focused determination. I could not let him get away with it. I could not sit quietly in my apartment while he stood in front of hundreds of people wearing a custom tuxedo and accepted their congratulations on starting his first family. He had stolen my childhood, and now he was trying to steal my reality. I needed to confront him, not privately, not in a quiet phone call he could easily hang up on, but there, in his new world, in front of the audience he was performing for. I told Jessica my plan late one night over coffee. She looked at me for a long, silent moment, her brow furrowed with deep concern. Sarah, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? This is going to be explosive. You are walking into a lion's den. Once you do this, there is no going back, no fixing whatever is left of your relationship with him. I looked her dead in the eye, my resolve completely unshakable. Jessica, there is no relationship left to fix. He killed it when I was 10, and he buried it on that website. I am not doing this to win him back. I am doing this for me. I need to look him in the eyes and show him that I exist. I need to hand the truth directly to his new bride, because if she is marrying him, she deserves to know exactly what kind of monster she is tying her life to.
Jessica nodded slowly, a fierce, proud smile spreading across her face. Okay, she said, squeezing my hand tightly. Then we are going to do this right. You are going to look absolutely stunning. You are going to walk in there with your head held high, and you are going to drop a nuclear bomb on his perfect little fairy tale. The very next day, I went to my mother's house. I did not tell her my plan, knowing she would worry herself sick, but I asked to look through her old files for some medical history paperwork. Deep inside a rusty metal lockbox in her closet, I found exactly what I needed. It was my original certified birth certificate. The thick, slightly yellowed paper felt heavy with history in my hands. There, clearly printed in faded black ink under the section for father, was his full legal name, Robert James Miller. It was undeniable, irrefutable, state-certified proof of my existence and his ultimate betrayal. I carefully folded the document and placed it inside my best clutch purse. The week leading up to the wedding was a blur of agonizing anxiety and meticulous preparation. Jessica helped me pick out a dress, a sleek, dark navy gown that was elegant enough to blend in with the wealthy country club crowd, but understated enough not to draw immediate attention at the door. I spent hours practicing my breathing, running through every possible scenario in my head.
The morning of the wedding dawned bright, clear, and mockingly beautiful. I woke up with a knot of pure dread sitting heavily in my stomach. I could not eat. I could barely drink a glass of water without feeling nauseous. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror for a long time, meticulously applying my makeup, trying to mask the dark circles of sleeplessness under my eyes. I looked at the woman in the reflection, a woman who had spent her entire life feeling like she was not enough, and I promised her that today she would finally take her power back. Jessica drove me to the venue. The drive took over an hour, taking us far away from the modest suburban neighborhoods we knew and deep into the heart of old money. Massive, sprawling estates with perfectly manicured lawns flashed past the car windows. The wealth was intimidating, a stark, painful contrast to the financial struggles my mother and I had endured because of his abandonment. When we finally pulled up to the imposing wrought iron gates of the country club, my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the door handle just to keep them still. Jessica parked the car down the street outside the valet zone, giving me a secluded place to prepare. I will be right here, she promised, her voice a steady, comforting anchor in the storm of my anxiety. I have my phone in my hand. If anything goes wrong, you call me and I am coming in there. You are brave, Sarah. You are so incredibly brave. I took one last, deep, shaky breath, stepped out of the car, and began the long walk up the winding, tree-lined driveway. The air was warm, filled with the scent of blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass. I could hear the faint, elegant strains of a live string quartet drifting through the breeze. I kept my head down, blending in with a group of late-arriving guests as we approached the grand entrance of the clubhouse. The security was surprisingly lax,
mostly just older ushers directing people toward the outdoor garden where the ceremony was already taking place. I slipped past the greeting tables, ignoring the beautifully calligraphed seating charts and the towering arrangements of white orchids. I found a secluded spot near the back of the garden, hiding behind a large stone pillar covered in thick green ivy. From there, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the altar. And then I saw him. Robert was standing there, looking incredibly handsome in a sharp, tailored black tuxedo. He looked happy. He looked completely at peace. When the music swelled and Emily began walking down the aisle in a breathtaking custom-made lace gown, I actually saw him wipe a tear from his eye. The utter hypocrisy of it all was physically nauseating. He was weeping tears of joy for a new beginning, completely unbothered by the trail of destruction he had left in his wake. I watched the entire ceremony in a state of numb detachment. I listened to them exchange poetic, heartfelt vows about honesty, integrity, and building a foundation of truth. Every word felt like a sharp, agonizing slap across the face. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted into thunderous, joyous applause. I stayed hidden in the shadows as the guests transitioned from the garden into the massive, opulent ballroom for the reception. I waited until the cocktail hour was well underway and the guests began taking their seats for dinner before I quietly slipped inside the ballroom. The room was breathtakingly beautiful, dripping with crystal chandeliers, towering floral centerpieces, and tables draped in heavy silver silk. I found a small, empty service alcove near the kitchen doors and stood there, a silent, invisible ghost from his past, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The dinner service was a blur of clinking silverware and loud, cheerful chatter. I watched from the shadows as my father worked the room, shaking hands, laughing heartily, playing the role of the charming, successful patriarch. He looked so comfortable in this world of wealth and privilege, a world he had bought his way into with lies and deceit. Finally, the clinking of a spoon against a crystal glass cut through the noise of the room. The lights dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd. Then it was Robert's turn. He confidently took the microphone, standing up at the grand head table, looking out over the sea of smiling, expectant faces. Emily sat next to him, gazing up at him with absolute, unadulterated adoration. I felt my heart begin to hammer a frantic, chaotic rhythm against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. "I want to thank you all for being here today," Robert began, his voice smooth, charismatic, and echoing loudly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Emily, you are the absolute light of my life. Before I met you, my life was just work. It was empty. I never truly understood what it meant to have a partner, to have a real home." He paused, letting the emotional weight of his words settle over the room. "I am 52 years old, and I can honestly say that my life is just beginning today. I am so incredibly blessed to have a clean slate, to start my very first family with the woman of my dreams. I cannot wait to experience the profound joy of having children, to be the father I have always dreamed of being." The crowd erupted into a chorus of cheers and applause, raising their own glasses in a joyous toast. But I did not hear the applause. I only heard the rushing of blood in my ears, a loud roaring sound that drowned out everything else in the room. A clean slate, my very first family, the absolute, unmitigated gall of the man. The rage that had been simmering inside me for weeks suddenly boiled over, completely overriding my fear, my anxiety, and my instinct to hide. Before I even consciously made the decision to move, my feet were carrying me out of the shadows of the alcove. I stepped out onto the pristine, polished hardwood floor of the ballroom, my dark navy dress standing out starkly against the sea of pastel colors. I walked with a slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly purposeful stride, my eyes locked dead onto the center of the head table. The room was massive, and the walk felt like it took an eternity. As I crossed the floor, a few heads began to turn. Whispers started to ripple through the tables. I ignored them all, my focus entirely consumed by the man holding the microphone. Robert was still smiling, taking a sip of his champagne, basking in the adulation of his new family. He did not notice me until I was less than 20 feet away. When his eyes finally drifted over the crowd and landed on my face, the reaction was instantaneous and absolutely devastating. I watched the confident, charming smile literally fall off his face, replaced by a mask of pure, unalterated terror. He lowered the glass slowly, his hand suddenly shaking so badly that the champagne spilled over the rim and dripped onto the pristine white tablecloth. He recognized me. Even after all these years, even after all the lies, he knew exactly who I was. I reached the head table, the silence around me spreading like a shockwave. Emily, noticing her new husband's sudden paralysis, turned to look at me. Her beautiful, perfectly made-up face was etched with polite confusion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice sweet and completely unaware of the bomb I was about to drop. I did not look at Robert. I looked directly into Emily's eyes. They were kind eyes, and for a brief, fleeting second, I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do to her. But she deserved the truth. I slowly opened my clutch purse, the metallic snap echoing loudly in the tense silence of the room. My fingers, surprisingly steady now, pulled out the thick, folded piece of government paper. I smoothed it out and placed it gently on the table, right on top of her gold-rimmed dinner plate. "You have a beautiful wedding, Emily," I said, my voice remarkably calm, clear, and loud enough to be heard by the surrounding tables.
"But before you commit the rest of your life to this man, I thought you should have all the facts about the clean slate you are marrying." Emily frowned, looking down at the paper. "What is this?" she asked, her voice faltering slightly as she picked it up. Robert finally found his voice, a desperate, raspy croak. "Sarah, please don't do this. Not here." He reached across the table, trying to snatch the paper from his bride's hands, but Emily pulled away, her eyes scanning the document. I took a step back, standing tall and unwavering. "That is my certified birth certificate," I announced, making sure my voice carried. "My name is Sarah Miller. I am 26 years old. And the man sitting next to you, the man who just told a room full of people that he is so excited to start his very first family, is my father." A collective, horrified gasp sucked all the air out of the ballroom. The silence that followed was so absolute, so profound, that you could hear a pin drop. Emily's eyes darted frantically from the paper to me, and then slowly, horrifyingly, to Robert. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. "Robert?" she whispered, her voice trembling violently. "Robert, what is she talking about? Is this true?" Robert looked like a trapped animal, sweating profusely. "Emily, sweetheart, let me explain," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It was a long time ago. It's complicated. I was going to tell you." The lie was so pathetic, so utterly transparent that it made me sick. He abandoned my mother and me when I was 10 years old, my voice gaining strength, cutting through his pathetic excuses like a sharp knife. He never called, he never visited, he completely erased me from his life so he could pretend to be the perfect man for you and your family. He is a coward, Emily, and a liar, and you deserve to know exactly who you are starting a family with. Emily dropped the birth certificate onto the table as if it were on fire. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. She looked at Robert, her face contorting with a mixture of profound betrayal and absolute disgust. "You told me you had no baggage," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysterical tears. "You told my father you had never been married, never had kids. You looked me in the eye and swore to me." The entire room was in chaos now. Guests were standing up, whispering furiously, pointing. The illusion was completely shattered. Robert tried to grab her hand, but she recoiled violently, slapping his arm away. "Don't touch me," she sobbed, backing away from the table. She turned and ran off the raised platform, fleeing toward the heavy oak doors of the ballroom, her beautiful white gown trailing behind her like a ghost. Her parents, looking absolutely horrified and furious, immediately rushed after her, shooting murderous glares at Robert. The groom was left standing alone at the head table, surrounded by the ruins of his perfect, carefully constructed lie.
He looked at me, his face twisted with pure, venomous hatred. "You ruined my life," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. I looked right back at him, feeling a massive, crushing weight finally lift off my shoulders. "No, Robert," I replied calmly. "You ruined your own life. I just provided the documentation." I turned my back on him and walked out. The transition from the stifling, tense atmosphere of the ballroom to the quiet, peaceful night outside was jarring, but incredibly liberating. I walked down the long driveway, my heels clicking loudly on the pavement, a triumphant rhythm of closure. When I reached Jessica's car, she was standing outside, leaning against the door, looking at me with wide, expectant eyes. "Well?" she asked breathlessly. I let out a long, shaky exhale, a genuine, unburdened smile breaking across my face for the first time in weeks. "It's done," I said quietly. "He's exposed. Everyone knows." In the weeks that followed, the consequences of that night unfolded exactly as one might expect. Emily never went back to him. She filed for an annulment within the week, citing gross misrepresentation and fraud. Her wealthy, influential family ensured that Robert was completely blacklisted from their elite social circles, crippling his business connections and leaving his reputation in absolute tatters. He lost the pristine, perfect life he had built on a foundation of cruel lies.
Looking back on that incredibly chaotic, emotionally exhausting day, I realized that confronting him was never really about revenge. It was about radical self-acceptance. I had spent so much of my life internalizing his rejection, believing that I was a secret that needed to be hidden, a mistake that needed to be erased. But by walking into that room and demanding to be seen, I finally proved to myself that my existence is valid, that my mother's struggles were real, and that the truth cannot be buried under expensive flowers and tailored suits. I am no longer the scared little girl waiting by the window for a father who is never coming home. I am strong, I am resilient, and I am surrounded by people who choose to love me every single day. If you found out the person who gave you life was actively erasing your existence to build a lie, would you have stayed quiet, or would you have walked into that ballroom too? Until the next story.